the question that changes everything. Instead of asking, "What should I do?" ask, "What evidence would change my mind?" Introduce confirmation bias. Explain why intelligent people often become more wrong because they search only for supporting evidence. Choosing one job offer instead of another. Buying a house that stretches your budget. Trusting the wrong business partner. Saying yes or saying no. Most of life's biggest turning points arrive disguised as ordinary moments. Years later, people often look back and wonder, "What was I thinking?" The answer is almost never, "I wasn't intelligent enough." In fact, some of the smartest people in the world make spectacularly bad decisions. Doctors, CEOs, investors, scientists. History is filled with brilliant minds making choices that seem impossible in hindsight. Not because they lack knowledge, because every human brain shares the same invisible shortcuts, and those shortcuts quietly shape almost every decision you make. Tonight, you'll discover why intelligence doesn't protect you from poor decisions, why your brain keeps choosing what feels right instead of what's actually right, in a simple psychological framework that can dramatically improve the choices you make for the rest of your life. Because better decisions rarely come from having more information. They come from understanding the mind that's making them. Imagine walking into your favorite grocery store. Without thinking, you reach for the same shopping cart, walk the same aisles, buy many of the same products. You aren't carefully analyzing every choice. Your brain has already decided most of them before you become aware of it. Now imagine if every tiny decision required careful analysis. Which socks should I wear? Which route should I drive? Which spoon should I use? How much coffee should I pour? You'd never leave the house. So your brain evolved a remarkable solution. Instead of calculating everything, it builds shortcuts, patterns, habits, mental rules. Psychologists sometimes call these heuristics. They're incredibly efficient and surprisingly dangerous because shortcuts don't ask, "What's objectively true?" They ask, "What's worked before? What's familiar? What's easiest?" Most of the time, that's exactly what keeps you alive. But occasionally, it's what keeps you stuck. The fascinating part is that these shortcuts don't only influence small choices. They shape the biggest decisions you'll ever make. Who you trust, where you invest, which opportunities you ignore, and sometimes they convince intelligent people to reject extraordinary opportunities simply because their brain mistakes familiarity for safety. Imagine walking into a car dealership. The first car you see costs $80,000. You immediately think, "That's expensive." A few minutes later, the salesperson shows you another model. Costs $55,000. Suddenly, it feels almost reasonable. Nothing about the second car changed. Only your point of comparison did. The same thing happens when you negotiate a salary, buy a house, choose a restaurant, or even decide how much time something should take. The very first number your brain encounters quietly becomes the reference point for everything that follows. Psychologists call this anchoring bias. And once an anchor is set, your mind struggles to escape it. Retailers understand this remarkably well. That's why luxury stores often place their most expensive products near the entrance. Not because they expect everyone to buy them, but because they subtly redefine what normal feels like. After seeing a $5,000 watch, $500 suddenly appears modest. The price didn't change. Your perception did. Anchors don't have to be prices. They can be expectations, opinions, past experiences. Someone who grew up believing success requires working 18-hour days may reject healthier opportunities simply because they don't match the original belief. The first story your brain accepts often becomes the ruler it measures everything else against. Here's the dangerous part. Most people believe they're evaluating options objectively. In reality, they're often comparing everything to an invisible reference point they never consciously chose. The smartest decision makers don't ask, "Is this good?" They first ask, "Compared to what?" That single question has saved investors millions, businesses billions, and ordinary people from countless expensive mistakes. Imagine you've spent 3 years building a business, countless weekends, late nights, savings you've worked years to accumulate. Then one day, the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. The business isn't working. Logically, the answer seems obvious. Walk away, start something better. But that's rarely what happens. Instead, many people invest even more time, more money, more energy, hoping the next month will somehow justify the last 3 years. This isn't determination, at least, not always. It's one of the most powerful psychological traps ever discovered. The sunk cost fallacy. Your brain quietly whispers, "You've already come this far. You can't stop now." The problem is, past investments cannot be recovered. Whether you continue or quit, the time has already been spent. The money has already left. The only question that matters now is, what's the best decision from this moment forward? Yet that's the one question our emotions desperately try to avoid. History is filled with companies that refused to change. Investors who held collapsing stocks. People who stayed in unhappy careers or unhealthy relationships simply because leaving felt like admitting the past had been wasted. But psychology offers a different perspective. Walking away from a bad decision doesn't waste your past. It protects your future. Have you ever noticed that making one difficult decision somehow makes the next one even harder? After choosing a mortgage, you don't want to decide what's for dinner. After spending hours solving problems at work, even replying to a simple text feels exhausting. This isn't laziness, it's psychology. Every decision you make consumes a small amount of mental energy. Most of the time, you don't notice it, but throughout the day, those tiny decisions quietly accumulate. What should I wear? Which email should I answer first? Should I buy this? Should I wait? By evening, your brain is running on far less decision-making power than it had that morning. Psychologists call this decision fatigue. The quality of your decisions doesn't stay constant throughout the day. It slowly declines. That's why people are more likely to procrastinate, spend impulsively, order unhealthy food, or simply choose the easiest option late at night. Not because they suddenly became less disciplined, because their mental resources have been depleted. This is exactly why many successful people reduce unnecessary choices. Steve Jobs became known for wearing nearly the same outfit every day. Barack Obama once explained that he deliberately limited everyday decisions, not because clothing didn't matter, but because important decisions did. Every small decision you eliminate protects mental energy for the decisions that actually shape your life. Now think about how many important decisions people make at the worst possible time. Signing contracts after an exhausting workday, making investment decisions late at night, having serious relationship conversations when both people are emotionally drained. The timing isn't just unfortunate. It changes the decision itself. Sometimes, the smartest decision isn't choosing differently. It's choosing later. Imagine you're considering starting a business. You watch videos about successful entrepreneurs, read inspiring stories, follow people who built million-dollar companies. Every piece of information seems to confirm this is the right decision, feels like careful research, but something important is missing. Very few people
actively search for evidence that challenges what they already believe. Instead, we naturally collect information that agrees with us and quietly ignore information that doesn't. Not because we're dishonest, because our brains crave consistency. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. It influences almost everything: politics, investing, relationships, business, even the opinions we form about ourselves. Once your brain builds a story, it begins searching for evidence that keeps the story alive. Imagine two investors reading the exact same financial report. One already believes the company will succeed. The other expects it to fail. Remarkably, both finish reading feeling even more confident they were right. The information was identical, only the interpretation changed. The best decision makers understand something most people never realize. The goal isn't proving yourself right. It's discovering when you're wrong. Before every important decision, ask yourself one uncomfortable question. What evidence would completely change my mind? That single question has prevented countless expensive mistakes, because it forces your brain to look beyond what it already wants to believe. Imagine you're standing at a crossroads. One path feels comfortable, the other feels uncertain. Your instinct tells you to ask, which one feels right? But feelings are unreliable guides. They change with your mood, your stress, even how much sleep you got the night before. Great decision makers ask different questions. The first question is surprisingly simple. Am I deciding with emotion or with evidence? Emotions aren't the enemy. They're valuable signals. But signals aren't conclusions. Fear can protect you from danger, can also stop you from accepting the opportunity that changes your life. The challenge is learning the difference. The second question is even more powerful. If my best friend asked me for advice, what would I tell them? Something remarkable happens when you step outside your own story. Your thinking becomes clearer, more balanced, more rational. Psychologists call this self-distancing. It's one of the simplest ways to reduce emotional bias. Now imagine making every important decision from the perspective of someone you deeply care about. Would you tell your friend to stay in a miserable job simply because they've already spent 10 years there? Would you tell them to ignore a promising opportunity because it feels unfamiliar? Probably not. Yet we often give ourselves advice we'd never give anyone else. The third question reaches even further into the future. Will this decision still matter 5 years from now? Most of the things that keep us awake at night won't matter next month. Many won't even matter next week. But a few decisions quietly shape the next decade. Learning the difference is one of the greatest skills you can develop. Researchers have discovered something fascinating. The more connected people feel to their future selves, the better decisions they make today. They save more, exercise more, learn more, and take fewer unnecessary risks, because they stop seeing tomorrow as someone else's problem. Imagine meeting yourself 10 years from now. Not the version you hope becomes successful. The version your current habits are actually creating. What advice would they give you? What decision would they beg you to make differently today? Sometimes, the answers are surprisingly obvious. We simply avoid asking the question. Every major decision creates two versions of your future. One where you acted, another where you didn't. Over time, those futures drift farther apart, until one day, they barely resemble each other at all. That's why better decisions are rarely dramatic. They're usually small. Choosing to have one difficult conversation, making one investment, learning one new skill, starting one project. Tiny choices repeated consistently eventually become a completely different life. People often search for one perfect decision that will change everything. But life rarely works that way. Extraordinary lives are usually built, one ordinary decision at a time, each one almost invisible, until you look back years later and realize they changed everything. Imagine someone looking at your life 20 years from now. They don't see thousands of tiny choices. They see the results, the career you built, the relationships you kept, the habits you repeated, the opportunities you accepted, and the ones you quietly walked away from. Your life is invisible decisions, made visible over time. The fascinating thing is that most life-changing decisions don't feel important when they happen. Reading one book, making one phone call, going for one walk, starting one conversation, applying for one opportunity, each feels almost insignificant, until years later, when you realize one small decision quietly changed the direction of everything that followed. Psychology teaches us something surprisingly hopeful. You don't need to eliminate every bias. You don't need perfect information, and you certainly don't need perfect certainty. You simply need a better process than your instincts alone. Because instincts evolved to help us survive, not necessarily to help us thrive. So before your next important decision, pause, not because hesitation creates wisdom, but because awareness creates clarity. Ask yourself, am I reacting or reasoning? What evidence would prove me wrong? Will this matter 5 years from now? If someone I loved were making this decision, what would I tell them? Those 4 questions can interrupt years of automatic thinking. And here's one final question that may be the most powerful of all. Will my future self thank me for this decision? Not tomorrow, not next week, years from now, because the person you'll become is quietly being shaped by the choices you're making today. Most people spend their lives waiting for certainty, but certainty is a luxury reality rarely offers. The people who build extraordinary lives aren't the ones who always know the right answer. They're the ones willing to make thoughtful decisions, learn from the outcome, and adjust without letting their ego get in the way. Think about every great scientist, every successful entrepreneur, every remarkable leader. None of them avoided bad decisions completely. What separated them wasn't perfection. It was adaptation. They changed their minds when new evidence appeared. They admitted mistakes sooner, and they understood that changing your opinion isn't weakness, it's intelligence. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson psychology offers. The smartest people aren't those who always make the best decisions. They're the ones who build systems that help them make better decisions. Again and again and again, small improvements, repeated consistently, eventually become extraordinary results. So the next time you face an important choice, don't ask, "What's the perfect decision?" Ask, "What's the best decision I can make with the evidence I have today?" Because waiting for perfect certainty is often the fastest way to lose extraordinary opportunities. Every day, your future quietly asks you a question, not whether you'll make a decision, because you will. The question is, will you make it consciously, or let your unconscious mind make it for you? Because every remarkable life is built exactly the same way, not through one perfect choice, but through thousands of slightly better ones. And perhaps the next one begins today. If you enjoy discovering how your mind quietly shapes every decision you make, you'll enjoy our next investigation into the hidden psychology of pricing, where we reveal why your brain often mistakes expensive for better, and how businesses use that instinct every day. Subscribe to Great Minds Explained.